Hello and welcome to Bloomsday 2020 at the Killiney Martello Tower, No. 7. A Bloomsday event has been held at this tower for nearly a decade, and we wanted to continue this tradition. This year will therefore be no exception. Today's virtual online event, while a break with tradition in one way, is a continuation in another way, in the face of adversity. Now, I hope you enjoyed the program we've lined up for you over about the next hour or so. Our theme this year, insofar as there is a theme, is the Martello Tower itself, with James Joyce dragged in by the scruff of the neck and any other appropriate bodily parts as required. Now, it's not the Sandy Cove Tower, which was the opening scene in Joyce's Ulysses. But we're sure that Joyce won't mind the temporary upgrade. It seems appropriate to open with a contribution from Niall O'Donoghue, who owns the tower and who has meticulously restored it from its former abysmal state to the splendid example that we have here today. So I leave Niall to tell you all about it.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am the owner of Martello Tower No. 7 on Tower Hill, Killiney, County Dublin. This Martello Tower is located a quarter of a mile inland, overlooking Killiney Bay, with commanding views of Killiney Bay from Dalkey Island to Braehead. The 18-pounder cannon on the crown of the Martello Tower stands 300 feet above sea level and had a range of 1.5 miles and would have provided enfilading support to some of the other coastal fortifications in Killiney Bay. Tower Hill Martello Tower was part of the South Dublin coastal defences, comprising 14 Martello Towers and 2 separate gun batteries, erected from Bray to Sandymount and all ready for action in 1805 to deter a French naval invasion. Major General Benjamin Fisher, Royal Engineer, was in charge of this defence project. As the Martello Tower, guardroom and gun battery were all in ruins in 1996, I decided to restore the fort to its original state. To proceed with this project, I needed expert advice, and in 1997 I contacted Paul M. Kerrigan, a leading expert and author of Castles and Fortifications in Ireland, 1485 to 1945. Paul Kerrigan arrived on site in January 1998 and spent 3 days recording the state of the Martello Tower and its grounds, and later issued drawings for the project as it had looked in 1805. Clearing the site of debris and overgrowth commenced in 2001, and restoration continued until the 12th of July 2008, with the successful inauguration of the Martello Tower and the blank firing of the new 18-pounder cannon from the ground of the tower. As no original drawings were available and certain structural details were unknown, this required careful studying of any fragments and debris and marks on flanking walls. Items found in the debris included a portion of the original wall plate for the guardroom roof, which showed evidence of the rafter spaces for the roof, and paint on the inside flanking walls evidenced this roof was supported by extra rafters rising up from the plinth of the Martello Tower through the guardroom roof void to meet and support the roof rafters. This discovery saved having supporting pillars inside the guardroom, as the roof was now self-supporting. This particular support is further reflected in the unique interior ceiling shape inside the guardroom under the exterior bow carved and fan-shaped exterior roof, whilst internally presenting separate concave and convex ceilings. In the year 1954, the Martello Tower was used as a state storage depot for 1,000 pounds of gelignite and detonators. At some time in the 1960s, the interior of the Martello Tower was set on fire, and all timbers and floors, timber doors were destroyed, leaving only burnt fragments in the debris. By examining the burnt fragments, and especially the external door fragments, allowed the original doors and floors to be replicated. A full-scale model of the project was made by Terry Murray, my son-in-law, and presented to me on Father's Day in 2008. I have opened the Martello Tower on several occasions for Heritage Week, Dunleer Ratdown Summer of Heritage, and Bloomsday, and several other events. I now take this opportunity to thank all who assisted me in recreating this amazing project. Sylvia and Doug Rogers, researchers, Paul M. Kerrigan, author, Martin Bibbings, canon expert, Brian Miller for my canon lessons, Nick Hall for the use of Fort Nelson, Terry Murray, model maker, and Lawrence Thermes, cannon firing and provider of reenactment troops in uniform for various events, and lastly, Paul O'Dwyer, the webmaster. Thank you.
The tower is not just a spectacular show item. It's a historic reconstruction, and as such, puts a premium on accuracy. Now, it's over 200 years since the towers were built, and much about them has been forgotten in the meantime. The foundation of the Irish state 100 years ago has meant that records, such as still exist, are no longer on this island, but are deeply buried in UK archives. And that is where Doug and Sylvia Rogers come in. Without their magnificent work in combing a variety of UK archives, and also in arranging for the production of the canon, the entire project, that's the tower we see today, would not have been possible. Doug has written the script, but I'll bring you their story in their own words. This all started from a question put to us in 2003 by Niall O'Donoghue. Could we, Doug and Sylvia, try and find original construction plans for the tower? At the time, it was hard even to find the footprint of the tower and battery on the ground, due to the general dilapidation, completely overgrown nature of the site, and general neglect caused by its use as a council waste dumping site. Consequently, we visited the National Archives in Kew on numerous occasions, hours and sometimes days spent to try and find them. This involved becoming members, searching through indexes, finding possible references, and ordering files for examination, a time-consuming process. When appropriate documents were found, we then obtained copies and sent them to Niall. Uncovering the required plans has so far not been possible. But along the way, we found a mine of historical information, including drawings and etchings of towers and batteries along the South County Dublin coast. Additionally, there were numerous box files containing correspondence and reports. We accumulated a comprehensive collection of information, mainly from Kew, and in addition, we also visited the British Library, the British Museum, the Royal Engineers Museum, the restored Martello Tower in Dymchurch, and, of course, Irish military records. When Niall had decided to restore the tower, we were instrumental in sourcing a foundry in the UK to cast an exact replica of a George III Blumfeld cannon and obtain permission to take exact measurements from an original in Fort Nelson. Additionally, we located a company in the southwest of England that was able to manufacture the gun carriage, they having made similar constructions for historic sites in England. All this would not have been possible without our introduction to Martin Bibbings of the Trafalgar Gun Company, who arranged for the casting and proofing of the cannon and production of the traversing carriage. He also supervised the first and subsequent firings of the cannon, assisted by members of the Shrapnel Battery, a reenactment group from the UK who had carried out similar engagements in Gibraltar and at reenactments of the Battle of Waterloo. They provided an introduction to the Irish reenactment group, the Connaught Rangers, who have assisted Niall in several events at the Tower in full period costumes, armed with their replica Brown Bess muskets. During our searches, we located a previously undiscovered map of the proposed defences for Killiney Bay, prepared by the French Major Lachaussee, who was working for the British. This formed part of a written report submitted by him and greatly assisted in understanding the rationale for the locations of towers and batteries. We were also very lucky in finding the renowned Irish military historian and architect, Paul Kerrigan, who is unfortunately now deceased. He had a comprehensive knowledge of forts and fortifications in Ireland and was of great assistance to the project. He regularly contributed to the Irish historical military magazine on Cosnathoid. Together with Paul, we visited Fort Amherst in Cheltenham, one of the best preserved Victorian military complexes in England. With the substantial renovation of Tower No. 7, it was suggested by the Fortress Study Group from the UK that submission for a Europa Nostra award would be appropriate. We therefore, in conjunction with Paul O'Dear, assisted in the preparation of this, and although Niall didn't get an award as such, his entry was shortlisted and selected for special mention by the jury in 2014. Maybe a well-deserved blue plaque will be forthcoming. Tower No. 7 is now described as fully restored, which is correct. However, there are still 3 cannon and traversing carriages required for the battery, and to complete the original specification, maybe a chimney and signalling mast on the crown of the tower would add more authenticity. Now, of course, there is always, in these matters, further research and work to be done. Firstly, why would a French major be assisting the British in the defence of Ireland against a possible French invasion in Napoleonic times? From our research so far, we're led to believe that he was a French royalist who was employed by Philippe d'Auvergne, the British spy master in Jersey, who was acting as paymaster to the French exiles. Precisely how he came to be advising on the location of defensive emplacements in the bay needs further study. And that's Philippe. From our researches so far, we know that Lachaussee had escaped the French Revolution and was active in the royalist cause. Secondly, who were the military unit garrisoning the tower and battery in the early 1800s? Were they all British? Or were they Irish fencibles under the command of a British officer? One of the cannon in the battery and the cannon on top of the tower were capable of firing inland as well as to seaward, which suggests that if the French had invaded and had landed, there might have been some assistance provided by the Irish. The possibility that the gunpowder magazine in the grounds of the gunner's cottage will be restored is an ongoing project. Paul Kerrigan previously attended at this site and carried out a comprehensive survey. Was there a water well in the site? There is evidence of a water tank within the tower, which we believe would have collected rainwater from the roof. This source would have been invaluable in the event of a prolonged siege of the tower. And finally, of course, are there any original plans for construction of the tower and the battery? This last point, which was the subject of the original question from Niall, is still outstanding. But along the way, in our research, we have had great fun and found out a lot. So, nobody can find the construction plans for the Martello Towers. The fact that they're all missing suggests that they were centralised and are most likely in a British archive. But where? If you find them, we will invite you next year to this event to recount your journey and to present the results. We will write you into history writ large. Kieran Cummins has chosen to make his contribution a tune called Bantry Bay from Bantry Bay itself. Now, Bantry Bay has a number of resonances in this particular context today. Doug and Sylvia mentioned the French royalist Major La Chaussee, who surveyed Killiney Bay for the British in 1797. Well, as soon as he'd finished his job, straight off down to Bantry Bay to do the same thing down there. The following year, in 1798, the French did arrive in Bantry Bay, unlike in Killiney, but bad weather prevented them from landing and most of them went home. Then, when it came to building the Martello Towers, there was one built on Garnish Island in Bantry Bay as part of the bay's defences.
Greetings everybody, and I'm on the shores of Bantry Bay here in West Cork on a lovely sunny day, and I thought it would be appropriate if I played Bantry Bay.
Brendon Fleming is a senior research fellow in the University of Buckingham in England. He teaches modernist writing and modern American literature. A native of Dublin, he has a particular interest in James Joyce, which was sparked by Declan Kyberd. Today, he brings us some insights into the subtleties of Joyce's language as it applies to the Martello Tower.
It is a great pleasure to be with you today and to be asked to share some thoughts about Ulysses. As a former structure intended for naval surveillance, the Martello Tower with which Ulysses opens seems an unlikely site for a domestic setting. It is being used as a temporary accommodation for Stephen Dedalus, Buck Mulligan, and Haynes, their friend from Oxford. However, it is initially an uneasy setting. Both Haynes and Stephen have been troubled by ghosts. Haynes has been raving about shooting a black panther during the night. Stephen has been ruminating on the death of his mother. Joyce uses the tower as a space to contain and address both imperial and personal traumas, and by so doing, to offer a more hopeful alternative. Mulligan's shaving mirror prompts the famous definition from Stephen. It is a symbol of Irish art, the cracked looking glass of a servant. As Declan Kyberd has noted, the reflections generated by such a cracked mirror are multiple and various. They are rich in possibilities. Kyberd goes on to argue that this sets the template for the whole book. Stephen's second-hand clothes are analogous to the second-hand tower. The book is a search for forms, both figurative and literal, which can serve as home. Joyce's appropriation of the tower through Stephen has a significance when juxtaposed with W.B. Yeats's own tower, Tour Ballylee. Having read the first chapter of Ulysses, Yeats wrote to a friend, quote, "I am making a setting for my old age, a place to influence lawless youth with its security and antiquity. If I had this tower of mine when Joyce began to write, I dare say I might have been of use to him. I have got him to meet those who might have helped him. I think him a most remarkable man, and his new story in the Little Review looks like becoming the best work he has done. It is an entirely new thing, neither what the eye sees nor the ear hears, but what the rambling mind thinks and imagines from moment to moment. He has currently surpassed in intensity any novelist of our time." End quote. Yeats here explicitly counterpoints his tower, Tour Ballylee, with Joyce's fictional one. The tower, I suggest, is an image Joyce uses to fashion how, in Yeats's words, the mind thinks and imagines. Yeats commented on the opening chapter of Ulysses as follows, quote, "It has our Irish cruelty and also our kind of strength, and the Martello Tower pages are full of beauty, a cruel, playful mind, like a great, soft tiger cat." End quote. The reference to Joyce's mind as cat-like is intriguing and astute. We have seen mention of the panther imagined by Haynes in the tower. In a later episode, this becomes the cat around Bloom as he prepares breakfast. Here are Bloom's thoughts contemplating that cat. Quote, "Wonder what I look like to her. Height of a tower? No, she can jump me." End quote. Joyce juxtaposes the tower to the domestic scene of Bloom in Eccles Street, such that the relative attributes of security in the former and domesticity in the latter can each compensate for the other. The tower entitled Martello is based on a mistake. The original towers in Corsica were Mortella towers. The transposition of O and A to create the mistake is a beautifully apposite Joycean one. Mortella is Italian for the place of the myrtle, a plant which is sacred to the goddess Aphrodite. Thus, the tower, as an image of war and defense, has secreted within its etymology and misnaming a legacy of love. Joyce in Ulysses opens up that secret to the characters and readers of Ulysses. The original meaning and significance of the tower is one based on maritime protection, the naval. Joyce takes this first meaning of naval and converts it such that the tower is now omphalos, navel of the world. The connection between birth, the sea, the mother, Dublin Bay and Delphi is complete. For Stephen Dedalus, the tower is a place of meditation and reflection on the death of his mother. It also marks his beginning in his search for his father figure, Leopold Bloom. It is both tomb and womb. Ultimately, Joyce brings together all of the associations of the navel, be they maritime or bodily, and he fuses them into the novel. The reversal of that O&A, which produced Martello from Mortella, is continued in Joyce's transformation of the navel, both maritime and bodily, to encompass all things novel. In the slip of a letter, from navel to novel, Joyce's tower offers an image of hope and love, mediated through linguistic and figurative transformations.
I am responsible for the tower's website, and I'll give you a quick taster and hope that you'll come back and explore the riches of the project online, and perhaps come and pay us a visit when reality is restored. The easiest way to get to the Martello Tower site is to come in first to my own website, and that's photopol.com, photopol.com. Down the left-hand side, you'll see the reference, the link to Martello Tower number 7. Click on that, and that will bring you into the tower's homepage. You'll see that the tower is called Martello Tower number 7, and that's because it's number 7 in the sequence of towers on the southern part of Dublin Bay. If you come over here to the first column, in the first paragraph, there is a link to the background to the Martello Towers and the greater Dublin area along the coast, and also a link to a more specific description of the emplacements in Killiney Bay, including the towers and the batteries. Now, I'm just going to hit a few things on the site to give you a taster, and I hope that if you find them interesting, that you will come back yourself to the site and explore them. First, I would just like to mention the inauguration in 2008, which will bring you to a specific page on the inauguration, and that will give you a load of commentary with some interesting visuals on participants inside the tower and so forth. The second thing that I would like to refer to is an item here called Saluting the French. Now, this deals with the French yacht race, Solitaire du Figaro, which is basically a yacht race around the French coast. But one of the legs of the race goes to somewhere outside of France. And in 2011, it came to Dublin, specifically Dunleary, and the yachts came escorted by a French frigate. And when they were leaving, the tower fired in the direction of the fleet, yachts and frigate, and I think that has given us the distinction of being the only Martello Tower, I imagine, ever to have fired on a French frigate. Over here, there are a number of talks. These three here, I'll simply refer to this one here as an example, and this was a talk I gave in the Alliance Française in 2015, which interestingly enough was the year of Waterloo, the year of the defeat of the French, something that I think was lost a little bit on the Alliance at the time. I've entitled it Vive la Corse because the original Martello Tower that the British copied and with which they were very impressed was in Corsica. And also, of course, Napoleon, against whom the towers were erected as a defense, was born in Corsica. So whichever way the final result went, Corsica was clearly going to come well out of it. Now, on this page, it had the title of Café Historique, but as it turned out, there was only me. And on this page, you can find the actual presentation in PowerPoint. You'll also find a script, and you'll also find links to various sources of background. Now, the same is true for the other two talks here, dealing with the same subject, basically. Other than the talks, if you're interested in the background and the written word, you may find this article in the Dublin Historical Record, which I did recently. It's 15 pages long, and it really deals with the whole panorama of the tower, starting off with the defence of the bay before the towers were built, the building of the towers, right through to an analysis of their military significance and placement, right through the 19th century when they were really more or less redundant, and then through the 20th century up to Niall's restoration of the Tower No. 7. So you find an awful lot of stuff in that, hopefully. So back to the page. An item here which I would again just draw attention to, called distinguished visitors. Now it's obviously not comprehensive, but I've just hit on one or two people who have actually visited the tower to give an example and a sort of a little reference. Owen Keegan was Dunleary county manager at the time, and he was very impressed. Bruce Davis was the Australian ambassador, and Ruth Adler succeeded him as Australian ambassador. Now, the significance of the visit of the Australian ambassadors is that the embassy is about 2 doors down the road. Well, the embassy residence is about 2 doors down the road, and that was interesting for them. This man needs no introduction. He was leader of the opposition at the time he visited the tower, and is now, of course, Taoiseach Emeritus, as we know. We were particularly happy to have a visit from the military archives led by Commandant Stephen McCowan, and they I think were quite impressed with their visit, and they got in a little bit of practice while they were at it. Bill Clements is an international authority on Martello Towers, both in Ireland and worldwide. He has published extensively on them. When he visited, he was the current chairman of the Fortress Study Group, which is a UK study group which study military emplacements around the world, these islands mainly. He was the person who suggested that we put the tower project in for the Europa Nostra European Heritage Competition, for which thank you, Bill. We didn't win a prize as such, but we got a special mention from the jury, and this was important to us, and we're very proud of it, because some of the projects in that particular competition are really huge-scale projects, restoration of cathedrals, building of huge bridges, stuff like that. So we were very pleased with the outcome. And finally, in our distinguished list, Philippe Millau, who at the time was director of the Alliance Française in town. That was in 2017, when he came out to the Bloomsday celebration at the tower. The previous night, he had been knighted by the French government in the French embassy in town. I would mention here as well, if you're interested in a virtual visit to the tower, Billy Byrne's video. If you click on that, it will take you around the tower, around the site and around inside the tower and so forth. And I would simply finish then by drawing attention to this bibliography here. You'll see that it's described as a bibliography/webography. This is a new feature of bibliographies in printed stuff, because an awful lot of stuff these days is born on the web, as they say, and it very often never sees a hard copy print version. So the bibliography here, which will give you extensive references to sources, has two elements. The first element is the traditional print element, where the sources are specified and there's some commentary on their worthiness. And the second section then is the web, which is a series of web links to material that's relevant to the tower. I only found out after having done this that you normally, when you give a link like this, you give an indication of when you last accessed it. And the reason for that is you're saying basically it was there when I looked at it. People tend to upgrade their sites, which is fair enough, but they forget more often than not to make them backward compatible, so that people who have already put links to items on their sites, these links now just go nowhere. So that is not a very happy practice. However, I think most of the sites that are mentioned, if not all of them, on this particular in this particular webography, I think are probably fairly stable. Hopefully, you will come back and have a look around the site, and we look forward. We look forward to seeing you. And if you want to contact us, any comments will certainly be welcome. I first met Truly Divine at a Bloomsday event in 2016 in the Leeson Inn, where she performed a series of Joyce-related songs. The Joyce connection on that occasion was not just Bloomsday, but also the location itself. This was the inn where some of the perpetrators stopped for a jar on their way back from the Phoenix Park murders in 1882. The murders are discussed in the Aeolus episode in Ulysses. Now, Truly sang for us here at the Tower in 2018, and we're thrilled to have her back this year for a virtual performance. Her first song, Bid Adieu to Girlish Days, is from Joyce's collection of love poems entitled Chamber Music. It is the only song for which he has composed both words and melody. Attendees at the Tower for Bloomsday last year may remember that it was one of the two poems I chose when discussing French translations of chamber music. Felix Larkin is a historian and retired public servant. His particular interest is the Freeman's Journal, whose newsroom merited a whole chapter in Joyce's Ulysses. Felix has already given us a Bloomsday talk on this, and he returns today to tell us about the Gray family, who had a summer house locally and were proprietors of the Freeman. You will notice a slight lag in the video image, coming all the way from down the road in Chatham.
Heroism in Killiney Bay. On Strand Road in Killiney, there is a row of very grand castellated granite-faced houses which back onto Killiney Beach. They were built around 1875 on sites originally occupied by summer huts for some of Dublin's elite. Among the elite who had one of these was the family of Sir John Gray. Gray is remembered today, if he is remembered at all, because of his statue, which stands in O'Connell Street and commemorates his work as a member of Dublin Corporation in bringing the Vartry water supply to the city. In addition, John Gray was MP for Kilkenny City from 1865 until his death in 1875, and he was the owner of the Freeman's Journal, Dublin's foremost nationalist daily newspaper in the 19th century, which features prominently in Joyce's Ulysses. The Aeolus episode of the novel is set in the Freeman's offices in North Princes Street, Dublin, adjacent to the GPO, and near where the Gray statue is located. After Sir John Gray's death, his widow owned one of the newly constructed castellated houses, which she named Vartry Lodge in honour of her husband's work in bringing water to Dublin. It retains that name today. It was presumably built on the site of the family's old summer hut. The story I will share with you today dates from late September 1868, and Sir John Gray's son, Edmund Dwyer Gray, was in residence in the summer hut. During a storm in Killiney Bay one evening, a schooner named the Blue Vein was wrecked, and young Gray, aged 22, swam out with a rope to the doomed craft, saving 5 lives. He was awarded the Tiller Fund Gold Medal and the Royal National Lifeboat Institution's Silver Medal for his bravery. Tiller medals were awarded for gallantry in the Irish Sea and its environs by a committee that administered a fund set up to assist survivors of a vessel called the Tiller, lost in 1854 at Lambay Island off the North County Dublin coast. The Tiller was an immigrant ship bound for Australia from Liverpool, and many of those who did not survive and whose bodies were recovered from the sea are buried in a mass grave near the church on Lambay Island. Back to Edmund Dwyer Gray and his heroic deed. A young English woman with an interesting pedigree happened to be visiting Dublin in September 1868 and by chance witnessed Edmund's great feat and was afterwards introduced to him. They were married in the following year, 1869. She was the daughter and namesake of the notable Victorian philanthropist, Caroline Chisholm, celebrated as the immigrant's friend for her work on behalf of female immigrants to Australia. The elder Caroline was the wife of a British Army officer, and she has settled with her husband in Sydney in 1838. Before long, she became aware of the pitiful plight of young girls newly arrived from England in search of a better life, many of whom, stranded and penniless, became prostitutes. She began helping these girls to find shelter and jobs, and went on to set up an employment registry and temporary home for them in an old barracks in Sydney. By her efforts, thousands of girls were settled happily in New South Wales. The Chisholms returned to England in 1845, and their daughter Caroline, the future wife of Edmund Dwyer Gray, was born there in 1848. Mrs. Chisholm's philanthropic work continued apace. She travelled throughout Britain and Ireland, tracing relatives of former convicts and other settlers in Australia, and helping to reunite them by arranging for relatives to go out to Australia. She became an enthusiastic advocate of Australian immigration as the best way of coping with overpopulation at home, and in 1849 launched the Family Colonisation Loan Society, which provided savings facilities for intending immigrants. And then, after a certain amount had been saved, the society would lend them the balance of the money required to pay for their passage. She is so revered in Australia that she was depicted on their $5 banknote in issue between 1968 and 1991. This extraordinary woman was caricatured by Charles Dickens as Mrs. Jellyby in Bleak House, probably his most critically acclaimed novel. Dickens knew her in London, and he portrays her unsympathetically as obsessed by good causes in faraway places, characterized by Dickens as telescopic philanthropy, and as a result, shamefully neglecting her person, her family, and her household. At one point, Mrs. Jellyby proclaims that my public duties are a favourite child to me. It is an amazingly hostile portrait of Mrs. Chisholm, Edmund Dwyer Gray's future mother-in-law. Edmund succeeded his father as proprietor of the Freeman in 1875 and followed him into politics, becoming from 1877 onwards Home Rule MP successively for Tipperary County, Carlow County, and the prestigious St. Stephen's Green division of Dublin. But for the advent of Parnell, he might have led the Irish party at Westminster. He was Lord Mayor of Dublin in 1880, and he and his wife made the Mansion House a glittering social venue during his mayoralty. Gray died suddenly, aged 42, on the 27th of March, 1888. After his death, his widow effectively controlled the Freeman newspaper for the next 4 years. The Parnell split occurred during that period, ushering in a period of unprecedented volatility in Irish politics, which had huge implications for the Freeman. The paper's decline, which led ultimately to its closure in 1924, had its origins in the split and its turbulent aftermath. Mrs. Gray's response to the challenge of steering the Freeman through the crisis was ham-fisted. Neither her bizarre family background nor her marriage to an ambitious politician had equipped her for the problems she had to face. But that's another story for another day. Suffice it to say that the family sold off its interest in the Freeman in 1892. The Greys, Edmund and Caroline, had 4 children, of whom the eldest, born in 1870, emigrated to Australia in 1894, 2 years after his family had disposed of the Freeman. He was also named Edmund Dwyer Gray. He settled eventually in Tasmania, where he became a journalist and politician of note. In 1927, he was elected to the Tasmanian Parliament for the Labour Party, and he was Treasurer and Deputy Premier of Tasmania from 1934 until his death in 1945, except for 6 months in 1939, when he served briefly as Premier. When speaking in Hobart on the 14th of October 2017, at the unveiling of a monument honouring Irish convict women transported to Tasmania, President Higgins made a passing reference to the younger Edmund Dwyer Gray and to his successful career in Tasmania. His mother, Caroline Gray nee Chisholm, was a fabulously wealthy woman after her husband's death, and she did not remain a widow for long. She remarried in November 1891. Her second husband was a Captain Maurice O'Connor of the Connacht Rangers, and a scion of the Catholic gentry of Connacht. She was 12 years older than her new husband. They made their home in the late 1890s on Inishfail Island in Loch Allen near Dunshambo, County Leitrim, a property of the O'Connor family. Caroline passed the last 30 years of her life there in melancholy obscurity, afflicted by failing eyesight. She died in 1927. It is a prosaic end to a love story that began in such dramatic circumstances in Killiney in 1868. Those circumstances were recalled in an article by a well-known Irish journalist, John Augustus O'Shea, that appeared in the Universe, the English Catholic newspaper, in 1888 and was reproduced in the Freeman's Journal. O'Shea wrote with some flourish as follows. On the 25th of September, 20 years ago, the schooner Blue Vein was wrecked in Killiney Bay, and Gray swam through the hiss and surge of waters to the doomed craft with a rope, and was the means, under God, of rescuing 5 fellow creatures. For this he was rewarded with the Taylor Gold Medal, but he also gained the affections of a daughter of Caroline Chisholm, the emigrant's friend, who was a witness of his intrepidity. Remember this story when next you go for a walk on lovely Killiney Beach. The ghosts of Edmund Dwyer Gray and of his wife Caroline may be hovering close by. Thank you.
Felix mentioned the statue of Sir John Gray at the intersection of Abbey Street and O'Connell Street. Here's a modern view. This is an unusual view taken from the top of a bus, passing bus, and he appears in it at ground level. Of course, he's not at ground level. He's way up and on a great big pedestal. This is a Lawrence photo. The statue was erected in 1879, and the photo itself could be from 1879 or very slightly after it. This is a view from Killiney Beach, southern part of Killiney Beach, looking inland. Felix mentioned Vartry Lodge, where Sir John Gray lived. And before I get to that, I would just draw attention to the arrow on the right, which is actually pointing at the No. 7 Martello Tower. This photograph would have been taken sometime between 1880 and 1910, but the buildings clearly remained the same from the time that Sir John Gray died in 1875. Now you'll see the 2 castellated houses. They're 2 semi-detached castellated houses, one on the right, at the right arrow, and the other on the left. And the extreme left portion of the one on the left is Vartry Lodge. The road that services that is the Strand Road, which goes from the right to left, from north to south, and it starts at the railway bridge, at where the Holy Child Convent is now, and goes right down to No. 6 Martello Tower on the beach, further down out of the shot on the left. And from Strand Road, let's look at the other side of Vartry Lodge. And this is a modern photograph, up to date, and you'll see that it has survived as Vartry Lodge up to this day. And looking in through the open gate next door, you can see very clearly the semi-detached nature of the house with the castellated stuff there as well. Love's Sweet Song. is one of two songs that Molly Bloom was to sing on a concert tour organised by her lover Blazes Boylan. The other song, La Ci Daram la Mano, is a song of seduction from Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. The conversation in the Calypso episode of Ulysses went like this. "Oh, Boylan," she said, "he's bringing the programme." "What are you singing?" La Ci Daram with J.C. Doyle, she said, and Love's Own Sweet Song. Her full lips, drinking, smiled. Truly divine.
Once in the dear dark days beyond recall, when on the earth the mist began to fall, out of the dreams that rose a happy throng, low to our hearts love sang an old sweet song, and in the dusk where fell the firelight gleam, softly it wove itself into a dream. Just a song at twilight, when the lights are low, and the flickering shadows softly come and go. Though the heart be weary, sad the day and long, still to us at twilight comes love's old song, comes love's old sweet song. Even today we hear love's song of yore. Deep in our hearts it dwells forevermore. Footsteps may falter, weary grow the way, still we can hear it at the close of day. So till the end, when life's dim shadows fall, love will be found the sweetest song of all. Just a song at twilight, when the lights are low, and the flickering shadows softly come and go. Though the heart be weary, sad the day and long, still to us at twilight comes love's old song, comes love's old sweet song.
This is a little ditty I composed for last year's Bloomsday, but I thought you might like to hear it again. It brings together Gordon Brewster, Buck Mulligan, Stephen Dedalus, the Joyce Tower, and a goose. I have an interest in a cartoonist called Gordon Brewster, and I also have an interest in Martello Towers. Gordon himself had an interest in Martello Towers, but that's a bit beside the point for today. Oliver St. John Gogarty rented the Sandy Cove Martello Tower, where Joyce briefly visited him, and this visit provided the material and location for the opening pages of Ulysses. Senator Oliver St. John Gogarty wrote a 12-verse poem to a goose, and in his caricature of Gogarty, Brewster has him in the robes of a Roman senator leading a goose towards Leinster House. I've modified this to point to Joyce's tower. Putting all these ingredients into the pot led to the inspiration for the following ditty, which I have called Gogarty's Goose, or Mr. Joyce, your goose is cooked. Oliver St. John Gogarty invited this old goose for tea in his not-so-ancient bower. The goose got spooked and was quickly cooked in the Joyce Martello Tower. Though the goose was doomed and fair quick consumed at this literary tea, its entrails still cry out loud and shrill from the nearby Snock Green Sea. So now, Mr. Joyce, if you still have voice, you can proclaim loud and clear, Mr. Gogarty and the goose that he led to its consumption here. So that's it for this year from the Tower. I hope you enjoyed the event, and I hope you will come back again next year for a reality Bloomsday, hopefully. Before I leave you, I would just like to mention that today is the 74th anniversary of the death of the artist and cartoonist Gordon Brewster, whose cartoon of Oliver St. John Gogarty you have just seen. He died in my mother's shop in Howth. And it wouldn't be right to go without thanking those contributors who have made this event possible. Niall O'Donoghue, Doug and Sylvia Rogers, Felix Larkin, Brendon Fleming, Kieran Cummins, Truly Divine, not forgetting Eamon Moran, who accompanied her, and the National Library of Ireland, from whom I nicked the Gordon Brewster cartoon and the Lawrence photograph of Sir John Gray in O'Connell Street. Good day, Shiv Slán.